Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at a show called See, S-E-E. It's a pretty good show. It has some interesting things about it that some of you may like, some of you may hate. Overall in this video, I'm going to be telling you why you probably ought to at least give it a chance. Are you a fan of post-apocalyptic settings? Then this show may be for you. In this case, said apocalypse is a worldwide virus that robbed all of humanity of its sight. It seems to have only affected humans, as other animals appear in the show that seem to be sighted, like horses, birds, bears, dogs, etc. 600 years after this calamity, humanity has devolved into basically tribal living for the most part. Most of these groups live in small Neolithic villages with the occasional more developed city-state lording over the peasants. Most of these city-states seem to have held on to some advantageous facet of technology, whether it be the buildings and structures still left over, power and electricity, firearms, etc. Stephen Knight, the show's creator, reportedly was fascinated with Native American tribal cultures in the Old West and tried to model his world with those influences in mind. Other Aboriginal tribal influences can be seen, for example, right there, Season 1, Episode 1, Before the Big Battle. Momoa, the battle chief of the Alkeni tribe, getting his warriors fired up for the impending violence, launches into a really badass Maori haka dance. The people overall in the world are very superstitious, believing in witches, magic, etc. Sadly, taxes are still very much a thing, as we see tax collectors running around doing their thing. As far as the physical location where the show is shot, most of it is done in British Columbia. The beautiful forests of that region allow for truly stunning visuals, if that's your thing. Many of the critiques of this show center on the main premise that the entire world is blind. Indeed, it took a while for me to overcome this as well. I think most of the problem with a lot of critics is kind of a lack of imagination on their parts. So for my first viewing, I was very hypercritical. I was constantly saying in my mind, oh, come on, blind people cannot do that. How do they ride horses? Why do they make their hair look all cool and tribal when nobody can see it? The point that I'm getting to is that most of these things do make sense after applying a little bit of thought and imagination to it. And I'm not saying that somebody needs to engage in suspension of disbelief, mental gyrations in order to appreciate the show. I'm saying before you outright dismiss something as unlikely or impossible, look a little closer, because one, the show's creators have likely already considered it and dealt with it. And two, you're not as smart as you think you are, and you're missing something. All right, let's look at the big picture first. You must know how skillful and able the unsighted can be in our modern world. And that, keep in mind, is just a blind person getting by in a world made by and for the sighted people. They're the outliers. Now, extrapolate that ability to cope and get by and thrive to an entire world having centuries to become hyper adapted to the situation. No one can see. Sight is so far removed that the ability itself is regarded by most as nothing more than a silly myth. Maybe it takes a couple of watch throughs, but you do start to notice eventually the little details. Characters, they don't nod to each other to signal assent. In fact, this was reportedly one of the hardest habits for a lot of the actors to break, according to an interview with C's blindness coordinator. And that's kind of cool that they actually have a blindness coordinator. Some warriors' helmets have full face plates covering the entire face. Why not? Them eyes, they're not doing anything. Might as well have the full coverage. Most of these small villages have rope grid lines that are strung high overhead in the villages. This allows people just to raise up their staves or weapons and follow the lines to walk in a straight line right down the middle of the road. They don't explicitly say this or even really explicitly highlight it. You just kind of have to pick it up when you see a few people using it that way. What about the horses? My first watch through, there was a big battle. I was like, how the F do they ride horses? They're in a forest. Wouldn't they be unhorsed at every low-hanging tree branch? But no, if you look, you notice how everybody on the horses have long spears. Not only are long spears ideal weapons for being mounted, but just by simply tilting the spear a little bit forward of you, you can casually extend it ahead and it'll warn of any impending branch-related dangers ahead of you. All right, so all that being said, there are a few things that I can't figure out. Like the witch hunters, the bad guys, why do they all wear cool, ominous-looking black uniforms? How do they know what's black? Maybe they get all their wool from the same black sheeps or something. I don't know. But, you know, they look cool and it's kind of inexplicable. For most of these little details, I either forgive them based on the rule of cool trope, or just remind myself that applying that level of intense scrutiny to almost any show, whether the characters are blind or not, will result in some issues. So quick reminder to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And now back to the list. Seriously, how the hell did I not know about this show? I happened upon some advertisements for season 2 right before that kicked off. But how? How did I not know? A post-apocalyptic world with tribes, battles, a really far out central premise. I tend to zero in on shows like this. I read websites and blogs that really should have had some hint of this show. All this, and with Jason Momoa at the helm, Dave Bautista showing up for the second season. How had I missed this? Was it just crappy advertising? Maybe it was an odd quirk that I just completely missed news of the show's existence. It got a lot of critic hate for season 1, so that may have kept it suppressed somewhat. And it did come out on Apple TV rather than on Netflix or Hulu or something else that I actually have regular access to. I don't have Apple TV. I don't do Apple products. I'm an Android guy. The title, See, S-E-E, it really doesn't make itself amenable to internet searches. Most search engines regard See as either too short of a phrase to do anything with, or inevitably return a gazillion results having nothing to do with the show because See is such a ubiquitous, non-specific word. So, you know, kind of a bad title, guys. Maybe I just missed it. More likely, though, I think, is that for whatever reason, Apple TV just dropped the ball. And as further evidence for this Apple TV screwing up and not me just quite simply missing it, when I started watching the show, I got all excited about it and mentioned it to my brothers. They also are the kind of people specifically into shows just like this, and they had no clue what I was talking about. They'd never heard of it either. So whatever it was, I'm glad news of the show's existence finally trickled its way down to me. As mentioned previously, Jason Momoa, Dave Bautista, I'm in. Alfre Woodard, she always acts her ass off, I'm in. As far as Jason Momoa, I don't need to tell you, he's super popular with both men and women alike. Think about him playing Khal Drogo in Game of Thrones. As fiercely badass as he was in that role, you never actually got to see him cutting loose with the fighting and the combat. As Aquaman, he'd go woo and high five his compadres and call him bro. My man. But the ass kicking that he did in that movie was a bit hampered by the whole Disney Marvel setting. So he's had some minor bursts of awesomeness in various not quite so popular movies and shows. Frontier, Sweet Girl, the movie. In fact, he was absolutely awesome when nobody knew who he was, as Ronan Dax in Stargate Atlantis. His introduction turned that show completely around, basically upping the awesome factor by tenfold. Speaking of the awesomeness of Stargate Atlantis, here's a little treat for fans of that show. Remember how Colonel Shepard and Ronan Dax were such a cool team? They were like a not quite as popular Han Solo and Chewbacca.
Easy, Chewie. Those buttons are your friends. Just keep trying.
Well, guess who shows up in season 2? That's right, Shepard and Ronan Dax team up once again over a decade later. Sure, actor Joe Flanagan doesn't get really any screen time with Momoa, at least as far as I've watched in the series so far, but just think of the future possibilities. Alas, most people have not seen Stargate in any of its various incarnations, much to their detriment. The point that I'm stringing together here is this. In C, you get to see Momoa absolutely raping face. His combat is brutal, frequent, and up close. Because, blindness, you got to be up close. It's the best he's ever been on screen. Also, let's set aside the action and combat and look at the acting. Momoa is playing a father figure role. Early in season 1, there's a 17-year time jump that kind of gets the plot going. Momoa, as Baba Voss, war chief of the Alkeni tribe, suddenly has 2 17-year-old adopted children. Seeing him playing an older man, somewhat world-weary, battle-scarred, his brutal nature tampered down by the fear and love for his children, it is the best acting he has done. Then add to this the complexity of the whole "you're blind" thing. Even in this aspect, Momoa excels. Watch the way he walks. Watch the way he stealthily slides along in perilous, dangerous situations. He does it better than all the other actors on the show. You can tell he put time and care and thought and effort into this role. You see it every episode. So along comes season 2. They need to up their game a little bit, add to the story, get a compelling foil for Baba Voss to fight against. Someone who can challenge him, pose a credible threat to the towering mass of warrior manliness that is Baba Voss. Turns out he has a brother. They don't really look like each other at all. But it's Dave Bautista. Getting Bautista on the show was a stroke of brilliance. He's even bigger and even more physically imposing and scarier than Jason Momoa. And he can act. Look at him buffooning around as Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy. Then watch his Quiet Before the Storm performance in the beginning of the Blade Runner remake. He's got some serious acting chops hiding under all that muscle. One of the highlights of the show is Queen Kane, as played by actress Sylvia Hoeks. Guaranteed at first you will absolutely hate her. She's petty, petulant, tyrannical, maybe a bit childish, just plain weird and annoying. Her voice especially comes off like nails on a chalkboard. It's Irish accented, it's high-pitched, kind of sing-songy and lilting. You initially think it is bad or weird casting, but after you get into the show a bit more, you see it as simple genius. Queen Kane is so damn unlikable, yes, but you gradually come to see her strength, her indomitable willpower, her viciousness, and her nefarious intelligence. A lot of actors try to make a compelling victim by going over the top weird or quirky. Usually the audience can see it for what it is and reacts negatively. Occasionally, though, you end up with something like Heath Ledger or Joaquin Phoenix's Joker portrayals. Queen Kane is played in a very similar vein. I talked a little bit about the combat earlier. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at that. First, if you're looking to nitpick and call bullshit on all the improbabilities and errors related to the whole blindness thing, then it's during the combat that these problems are the most obvious. Okay, maybe the average warrior in this world is so hyper adapted that they can hear a blade whooshing at their head. Maybe they can hear the rustling of clothes and the clinking of armor. But still, you wouldn't be able to hear a damn thing in the middle of a skirmish or battle of any real size. There's just too much noise and too much going on. It seems to me that sword fighting in this world would involve a lot of tentatively reaching out and probing with your blade. Then, when you feel a light touch or something with the tip of your blade, you suddenly strike at it. It would look on film really kind of tentative and clumsy. For the show, they seem to sacrifice a bit of reality and practicality in order to make the fights look cool and interesting and dynamic. Obviously, you could frequently call bullshit about this, but let me make this clear. Damn near everything you watch on TV and in movies does this to one degree or another. Substance is sacrificed for style. John Wick as awesome as it is and as tactically sound as a lot of the action is, still requires a massive degree of suspension of disbelief. If you go into C looking to nitpick the ever-living shit out of the whole blindness thing, you're going to ruin the viewing experience for yourself. Similarly, if you go into John Wick, or any other movie for that matter, with the same level of pedantic nitpicking, you're going to ruin your viewing experience. Alright, with all that out of the way, the combat in the show, it's brutal, fierce, kinetic, and exciting. The more large-scale group battles are simply fantastic and heavily feature a lot of the creative and inventive blindness-related details. The single combat scenes, most often involving Jason Momoa, they are just plain awesome. Watching him cut loose in melee combat is great. We all know how the chosen one trope goes. You get a sci-fi or fantasy setting, an apocalypse-ravaged world works really well. Then you start with a protagonist in an unassuming rural setting, usually a farm, but a small tribal village works just as well. After shit starts happening, they get the call to adventure, and it's not too long before they find out that they have something unique that makes them super duper special. It could be a unique destiny, a hidden royal heritage, superpowers, or in the case of this particular show, they're the only ones who can see in a world of blind people. This, however, is not actually the case with C. It starts off heading down the path of that well-worn and maybe a little bit tired trope, but then it veers off. Sure, the adopted kids of Baba Voss are royalty, hidden royalty, and they can see, but it's not too long before you find out that that's not really all that unique. As the plot unwinds, other sighted people start popping up. They're still rare in the world, but they are out there. That leads to questions yet to be answered by the series. Have they always been there, popping up here and there over the landscape, or is this some kind of new leap forward for the human race? We don't know yet. Hopefully they will get to it. But the point of this is the story writers are brave enough and creative enough to not fall back on a commonly used trope, so good for them. Alright, time to wrap this video up. Overall, C is a good series that you may or may not have ever heard of. Thanks, Apple TV. If you like fictional post-apocalyptic worlds, mass tribal combat, stunning visual settings, and Jason Momoa tearing shit up on the regular, then check out C. And that'll do it for today's video, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Let us know how you liked it in the comments section. Let me know how you like the show C if you've seen it already. And also, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel as we bring you more thoughtful and intriguing content in the future.